Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Kumar Data Train here with Agile Meridian, and I have with me a special guest, Vitaliy Lyoshin. Is that how you say your last name?
Yeah, that's good.
Okay, great. Vitaliy and I worked together for about a year at a client, so we have a common shared history. And what I'd like to do is maybe turn it over to you, Vitaliy. You can kind of introduce yourself, talk about your history and how you got into Agile and Scrum, and then I'm gonna pepper you with a bunch of questions.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you, Kumar. So my journey started about 12 years ago in a startup here in Maryland, and it was a local company. Basically, we were doing a lot of web applications, mobile applications for different clients and like hospitality, restaurant businesses. So I started as a support tech person, and then I kind of grew a little bit to the customer support and then project management, product management roles. And then I ended up running development teams and traveling all over US, meeting customers, figuring out requirements from them, and kind of had this hybrid between project and product manager role. And then a few years later, I transitioned to a government agency, and that's where we met a few years later to work in the same program for the same team, basically.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, and then here in the government agency, I serve as a program project manager and a Scrum Master for 3 teams. So that kind of became more structured, if you will. That it's a pure Scrum Master role, and some of the responsibilities of the project management for the whole program that I track things like help tracking things like budget and people and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So and yeah, that's where I am right now.
So you've had quite an interesting path to Agile and Scrum specifically. So working in product development for the last 12 years, or project and product development, how has the shift to Agile methods like Scrum changed the way teams operate?
So in the beginning of my career, it was a little bit chaotic as I was trying to learn all these skills, how to do this. And we didn't have back then, or I didn't have a mentor who's like a Scrum Master or anything like that. So it was basically trial and error methods. What works best, we use it, and what doesn't work, we kind of stop using it. That's how I worked with my teams back then. And then I had to go through like getting a certificate, reading some books and going to events, meeting people. So that kind of shaped my understanding better. And that's what I can bring to the team now is more of a structure and more of a understanding of like a Scrum guide and like do things by the book, but also get experience from doing things and experimenting. It's an empirical process, like we all know. And that also helps when you like mentor and motivate, coach your team to experiment and add new things. So yeah, moving from chaotic, more like a stable environment, that was kind of the transition. And hopefully it will stay like that. But we always like to add new things and shake up teams to think outside the box a little bit. So.
That's awesome. I appreciate your experience and how it affected you and the things you had to do to be a more effective leader for the teams and support their growth and as they learn how to apply Scrum. What about for the teams? Moving from waterfall to Scrum. What do you think the impact was on the people on the teams?
So I think teams got a little bit more breathing room with the stops and cycles. To think and plan and then move forward. It's like, I like this analogy from military when you have the first line of defense, you attack, you move a little bit, and then you dig deeper, you kind of settle, and then you move forward again. And that's kind of like you have to innovate, do something really quick, get it out there to people, let them use it and give you feedback, and then build on top of that. We can't wait for a long time to get that feedback and experience from people. And it sometimes, very rarely, it helps to think through the whole process and maybe just think about the end result rather than how to get there. And then just start the journey and you get there somehow. Like GPS gets constant reroutes and avoiding traffic and tolls, and you end up in your location, the final destination, basically. So I
Yeah.
think that, yeah, that was helping teams in terms of like getting settled and then move on again.
Yeah, that's great. Sounds like the team members also had a good experience with it. There's a lot of negativity, I guess, that I see online, about Agile and Scrum lately. Lots of posts about Agile being dead and how developers and testers are complaining about it's too much rigor, it's too much this, or they don't have time. There's all meetings all the time and all this stuff. And how would you respond to that criticism that seems to be more prevalent these days?
Yeah, it's very interesting actually. Yeah, I heard some stories about Agile being dead and everything like that. I think people just use it wrongly when they say that. Like I see people, the companies especially, they think that they use Agile, especially in the top leadership, when people not necessarily got those training or experience and see day to day how teams operate and how they produce results. They get this impression that teams have a lot of overhead, they have a lot of meetings, they do this and that rather than writing code or talking to people. So I think educating leadership better will help. But I don't think Agile is dead. I think it's always been there. People just historically use different names for it. Like even like think about like Henry Ford, who created the conveyor first time, right? Was it Agile or was it waterfall? Well, you can play it in this and this way. It depends on how you think about things. But I think he was pretty agile and pretty innovative in the business. And that's what we're looking for.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I mean, Henry Ford was definitely an innovator and revolutionized how machines were built, revolutionized the factory, really, because factories before Ford came along, the people moved to the work, right? And in the assembly line model, the work moved to the people in stages. And so the people had certain set jobs and they just did those jobs, right? And so it was a clear innovation for its time, and certainly was much better than how things were before. Now, you mentioned leadership and how some leaders or managers, whatever, expect certain things from Agile, and when they don't get it, they may not implement it well. Certainly in their companies, when they don't get it, then Agile gets a bad name. What would you say is the role of managers, leaders? They often struggle, right? Because they have to give up some control to cede control to teams and allow team members to make decisions that maybe they would normally make. What advice would you give leaders, managers, middle managers when adopting something like Scrum or another Agile framework?
Yeah, so one thing would be to, like you said, to delegate this or lose control a little bit and have trust in your team to deliver results. Give them time to adopt the process and to demonstrate that they can deliver whatever they're doing. The second thing is educating yourself. Just look around to other companies or some case studies, or just talk to other people, your peers from other industries and companies, and see how they're doing. What are the lessons learned there? What are the pros and cons? So it's because people, when they get into the weeds of every day, they just don't pay attention to what's going on outside of their world. Sometimes I'm guilty of that myself. When I'm working on a project and there's no time, you like, okay, forget, I don't have time for this. But sometimes stepping back and looking at yourself and at your organization from the distance may help you see, maybe we should experiment. Maybe we should let team make decisions and see how it become. Because sometimes I hear that team goes to leadership with demonstrating the work, they presenting their results, they're so happy to show this progress and everything. And then there is just like a gap or some misunderstanding, or leadership is like, well, or they don't say kudos to the team or anything. It's like, oh, well, that feedback is not really there, and team gets discouraged, and leadership tries to push down their agenda on them is not really also helping too much with that. So
Yeah, it's a good point. Leaders really need to be aware of what they say, how they say it, and adjust their expectations when
Mhm.
they're adopting agile. A lot of times in companies, leaders, managers are rewarded for certain types of behaviors that run counter to agile. So, for instance, people, leaders, managers are their bonuses are based on, I
Mhm.
don't know, how productive their team is, or their department, or their division is. And so leaders, managers may tend to find it hard to lead or manage in a different way, right? Because again, that their bonus is based on it. Money they take home is based on it. How do you help these leaders? All the things that you said were great, but specifically to these types of things, the behaviors ingrained in them. How do you help them, or how do you help the company as a whole sort of move in the direction of servant leadership?
So the leaders who are assigning those bonuses and creating these perks based on the performance and everything, I think they have to be educated and they have to be exposed to what agile is and
Mm-hmm.
how it's structured and what it can do for the organization. Because who are in the trenches every day doing the work, product managers, project managers, scrum masters, developers, we already know what this is. We already know for the most part, or at least I would hope everybody know for the most part what this is and what Scrum or Kanban or whatever. But senior leadership may not know that to that granular details, and
Mm-hmm.
to them, maybe releasing more features is that's how they measure the performance. Just like how
Mm-hmm.
much code you written or how many new customers you acquired doesn't matter by which means you did that. So, and then when we align between the middle management who are responsible for delivering things in agile way, for example, maybe align them with the senior leadership who may not be as aware with those agile principles and how much time it may take, or we don't necessarily need to release 10 features. We can do one and it will bring more people or bring more money into the company, and kind of show and demonstrate in these different approaches. So maybe that will help. So yeah, I think
Yeah.
I didn't have much experience with bonuses assigned to my performance, but I heard some stories, and people sometimes get creative.
Yeah, it's in most large, private companies, government,
Yeah.
they have their own reward models and reward structures. Maybe it's not as visible as a bonus, but it just could be the culture in the company that
Mhm.
managers are supposed to act a certain way and direct people, because that's, if my title is director, I got to direct people. If I don't direct people, then I'm not doing my job, right?
Right. Yeah.
When I'm in a meeting, I got to go direct and tell people what to do. And Agile is saying, no, I got to shut up. This is not your meeting. This is the team's meeting to plan the work that they're going to be doing. But I know it's a challenge, and what you've said makes sense. It does make sense, and it's a process, right, for these people to go through their own change. Just like
Mhm.
team members that are used to getting orders, they have to go through a process to change their expectation. They no longer have to wait for someone to tell them what to do. They're much more empowered to go find the work that's most important for them to do right now, and just go start working on it. You mentioned servant leadership a couple of times. What does that mean to you, and how do you practice it, I guess?
I think about this in two ways, like mentorship and coaching, basically, because
Mm-hmm.
many times, like Scrum Master, for example, on the team, this is a servant leader on the team, and you don't have a direct reports. You don't have some administrative like abilities to control and to hire people and to let people go, or to give them the performance reviews or things like that. You may influence that. You may provide your feedback on it, but you can't really actionably do anything about that.
Yeah.
So when you become a coach or mentor, that's how you can influence your team to do great things. You can provide them with resources to educate themselves. You can recommend them things to do, or you can expose them to some other examples of how other teams are doing or other companies are doing. And you can even change the process a little bit. It's sometimes people think about, like, even Scrum, like, this is by the book, you have to follow every single step, otherwise you're not doing Scrum. This is not exactly correct. This is a framework, which is a flexible thing. You can change, you can add things, you can remove things, and try it. And it's so flexible, and so many things or variables you can play with. And that's where servant leadership becomes a huge player, because that's where you can apply all your knowledge and leadership and show the team how to do better.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So you've coached and mentored a lot of teams, and new to Scrum, new to Agile. What would you say are the biggest challenges that teams face when they're starting out, and how do you address them?
The biggest challenge is what we covered a little bit earlier: is this is a waste of time. All these extra meetings, all these extra things I have to do. Why do you ask me to estimate upfront something or whatever? So people just need to be exposed to these things one step at a time. You can't just throw this whole thing at them and expect them to be perfect next day. It doesn't work like that. So as a Scrum Master, forming a new team or starting coaching a team that you would like to perform better, you should write a plan first for yourself and say, those are the top priorities I will address first, and then this is next, and periodically do a check-in with either it's a tech lead or team lead or PO or whoever else is your peer on the team, and do a checks and balances with that person to make sure you're still performing well. That's one aspect of this. Second aspect of this, you have to start measuring performance of the team, or some sort of measurements you have to do, even if it's simple as how many tickets people do, or how many story points people do, the most favorite or least favorite burn down chart that some products show by default. So some sort of data points that you have to collect and assess over time and see the trends. That is greatly helpful. That's what I do very first thing when I start with a new team: the metrics and the plan how to improve things over time. And I think I highly recommend those techniques to everybody. So yeah.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So, help the team along, have some clear metrics so the team can see their progress as they mature along the path to whatever, their goals are. One of the things I often hear from Scrum teams, Agile teams, is that the retrospective is a waste of time. What would you say to that, and how do you help teams see the value in that ceremony?
Yes, we get that a lot. Retrospective, I think, is the least favorite and the least appreciated meeting, which is kind of confuses me a little bit, because I find it one of the most important ones for the team specifically, because this is where you get better. This is your opportunity. This is your chance to speak up and come up with something to make things better, or to remove something, removing waste, removing something unnecessary. It's also can free up for other things, right? So what I would say is start simple. There are some frameworks for running retrospective, which are really, really simple. You don't have to complicate it. Just ask your team what was good, what was bad in the last sprint, for example, or in the last week or months, or whatever the frequency you're going. And start there. And over time, build the confidence. Another thing is, if you record any action items on the retrospective, make sure they get done, and they get done quickly.
Yeah,
it's the most discouraging thing when people see that you meet, you spend all the time, you discuss things, and nothing gets done. This is the biggest discouraging factor that you can demonstrate to the team. So make sure those action items are getting done, whatever it takes. Scrum Master is responsible for this, and they should be able to to do anything they can to get it done. So yeah, and I hope people will appreciate retrospectives better when they use it more.
I think you're right on point in terms of the actions that you suggested, and I totally agree with them. I think the most important thing is that in order for the team to see value in the retrospect, enough emphasis has to be placed on the actions that come out of it. And the team should see that those actions are meaningful, that they actually help improve some aspect of how the team works. And if they do that, then they will see the value in it. And too often, I don't think enough emphasis is placed on the actions. Oftentimes it's just forgotten because there's so much other work to do. One other thing I hear a lot about is making and keeping commitments. I was curious what your thoughts are. A lot of times people, Agile gets a kind of a bad rap, Scrum does, because the team commits to a certain amount of work and then they don't deliver that. And it's a consistent underperformance, if you will, right? I'm going to do these 10 stories. I'm going to do these 25 points, and always they come up under that. So what would you say causes that type of behavior, and what can you do to solve that?
So it's a very interesting question, actually. I have to deal with this a lot too. You have to make you have to balance it well for the team, right? Because if your team does it 100% all the time, well, maybe they could have done a little bit more than that, and they just underload in the sprint. But when they constantly under deliver, to me, it's a sign that they either have, well, let me say, inaccurate estimation. They need to get better in that area. And also, they just need to be less ambitious. Just set up a little bit less, or like add less story points to your sprint next time, and do it a few times. I don't think anything crazy will happen if you will do 5 or 10 less points for the next 3-4 sprints. But it will build confidence in your team that you're actually delivering on what you're doing or what you're promising. And having that confidence in the team is huge. It will impact your performance for the future. Eventually, you will get back to the level that you started with.
Yeah, I agree. Good feedback, good advice. Where do you see Scrum going? It's been around now for 30 plus years, right? It was 93 was when it was first practiced. It was written about in 89 or 87, 88, I don't remember. Where do you see it going in the future?
We have now all these additional frameworks added to the book, right? Like Scrum of Scrums and Safe and Less and all these other ones, which are kind of evolutions built on top of the Scrum.
Yeah.
For maybe larger organization, for maybe larger products or whatnot, they have their own specific use cases. So I think over time, Scrum as a core will stay pretty much the same. In fact, a few months ago, I went to this coaching clinic or boot camp or something like that it was called, where a whole bunch of coaches sat down and said, like, should we write a new Scrum guide or maybe even Agile manifesto? And then after like 15 minutes, everybody, no, that still applies. That still works. No, don't bother with this. So I think it's not going to go anywhere. People are just going to find new use cases and create new, like Safe like or Scrum of Scrums like applications. And that's that.
Makes sense. So we're running short on time. What have I not asked you, Vitaliy?
Wow, what have you not asked me? I don't know. I think just my last advice would be to everybody, if you have a experience already with your team and it's doing great, I encourage you to step back and look from the side and say, what can we do better? What can we change to perform even better? That's kind of what I'm asking myself all the time. And if you have a team that is underperforming or you have some challenges that you're trying to overcome, go and talk to your peers. Go talk to your to other Scrum Masters or other project managers and figure out how they dealt with it. Don't quietly ignore this problem or issue you're dealing with. Just find that little vulnerability in yourself and say, you know what, I'm not doing this right. Maybe let me consult with somebody. So I do that all the time too.
That's great advice. Thank you so much for coming on the show, Vitaliy. Really appreciate it. I'm sure the audience will appreciate your insights and your experience. And please do join the show anytime. You're welcome back. Thanks again.
Okay. Sounds good. Thanks, Kumar.
All right, take care.
Bye.